Right. So you've heard some of the background there from Rachel in terms of kind of the theory behind universal services. So I thought next we would have, I suppose, kind of a live practice example of where kind of a strength-based approach is kind of being introduced and making a real difference. So very pleased that Jone from Surrey is able to join us today, and she's going to talk us through their kind of 5 steps approach that they've been kind of introduced. I think it's relatively recent as well, isn't it?
The rollout in Surrey County Council is recent, Paul, but we've been in one of the locality teams, we've been practicing, using the 5 steps for about 7 years.
Yep. Well, over to you then. Tell us all about it.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. So thank you for this opportunity. So we're here to bring you the good news of social care. So just a little bit of context. Just Surrey County Council is divided in 11 locality teams, and the Reigate and Banstead locality team is one of those locality teams. And in 2014, there was a tragedy, and one of the people that we serve passed away, and it had a huge impact on us as a team, of course. We lost a very respected team manager and a very respected social worker. But what it did is it showed us our vulnerability. And, we realized that, I mean, as we all know, when you're working in local authority, that the demands on the service outweighs its capacity. So we had to look at what we have and how we can work smarter. And that really was the birth of the 5 steps model. So you just to fast forward, so the 5 steps model, which I'll just briefly go over, has been implemented then in the Reigate and Banstead team since 2018. And now Surrey County Council has made a decision, I would say finally, to roll it out countywide to all the other all the other teams as well within the county. So just to give you just some data really, since the rollout in January, we started with one of the teams that had the longest waiting list, or waiting time for an assessment. So this team, they had people on their waiting list for about a year, and 9 months later now they don't have a waiting list. So when you hear data like this, you would think, oh, this is a light touch approach. It's just, sending people to other services. Not at all. As we have done the rollout, what we're seeing is a very strong and confident workforce emerging. Certainly, the rollout identified that there's a lot of institutionalized thinking. There's a lot of cultural practice. And even though all services would say to you that we are putting the person at the center of the care, in reality, that is not what is happening, because capacity is a very big driving force with service provision. And when we go to the different teams, we ask, what is the criteria for for your partners? A lot of the teams, they don't know. When they ask their partners, there's not clear guidance as to what the criteria is. So we then have to look at national frameworks. And I mean, just for example, health colleagues, the criteria usually is pretty much similar no matter where you are in the county, for hospital admission avoidance or facilitating discharges, etc. So I suppose I just wanted to communicate that, when you can't, it's not about associating, a lack of waiting time to a light touch approach. It's actually the opposite. What we're asking teams, what we're asking professionals to do is provide robust clinical reasoning for what they're doing and why they're doing it. Certainly, one of the other things that we're finding is because when people, are just firefighting, it's just, let's just put a plaster on it, put a person on the waiting list, and then, we'll get to them when we get to them. So what we're now doing is we're doing a lot of work at the front door, meeting people's needs at the front door, which means a lot of remote assessments, which means we're asking practitioners to provide robust clinical reasoning for what they're doing, why they're doing it, and also what they're not doing and why they're not doing it. So just again, some statistics, so 80% of all incoming referrals to the service, we're now dealing with at the front door. And so there's about 20% of referrals that get the full on face-to-face assessment. And I say full on face-to-face assessment because there's 5 steps, and step 4 is a quick visit. So even though that is a face-to-face assessment, that is still done as a part of the front door. What is our vision? Our vision is to bring order in health and social care. Now, you would say that's a very ambitious vision, but then I would suggest, well, it's very ambitious to suggest that there's a locality team without a waiting list, and that has been our reality. So our vision is very much based in reality, with the person at the very center of that care, which is the first thing that we consider is which service is best placed to meet this person's needs. Rather than looking at capacity, we're looking at actually which service would meet this person's needs. So, for example, does the person need rehab before we then would recommend any equipment? And by recommending equipment, we could potentially create a dependency on that equipment. So where there's a need for rehabilitation, we would then refer to the services that would provide that rehabilitation. Or if it's an acute health episode, whereas in the past our duty workers would just run out and do that emergency visit and provide potentially a hoist, which could then facilitate deconditioning, because we as a locality have then managed that risk. Our health colleagues will potentially put that person, at the back of their waiting list. So actually what we've done long term, we facilitate the deconditioning, rather than to refer that person, because they're experiencing an acute health episode, to our health colleagues, which is the best place service to meet this person's needs. Our vision in terms of the workforce is to create a very confident and competent workforce that is very, skilled in pretty much every remit of the service that they need to provide. I'm convinced that we don't need more people. We just need people who are absolutely confident and competent in what they're doing. For example, if you have one confident worker, they could potentially do more, if not the same as 10 people who are not confident or have the training that they need. And then, of course, for the people that we serve, our goal is to provide a good, proportionate, and effective service for them as soon as we possibly can, and not to put them unnecessarily on a waiting list. So there's there's a lot to talk about when we talk about the 5 steps. I mean, first of all, there is the 5 steps, and what are they? And then the second thing is, well, what are the principles underpinning those 5 steps? Because when you hear what they are, it's very basic, but actually putting it into practice is it's a change in culture. It's a change in how people approach a conversation. It's a change in how they record their clinical reasoning. It's a change in their thinking. It's identifying their blind spots. Because of institutionalized thinking, cultural practice, we've all developed a lot of blind spots, and we don't know what we don't know, right? So you need somebody actually to point out, well, have you considered this? So it's a very challenging experience, actually, for the teams when we do the rollout, because they feel like they're being questioned, and we are just asking them to actually explain their clinical reasoning, and it's been actually quite difficult to see the clinical reasoning on the records, but that's another story. Okay, so what are the 5 steps? And I'm talking very fast. I'm very aware of that, but it's simply because this can be a very long conversation, and I'm sure there's not going to be enough time to cover everything. But step 1 is simply signposting. So the statistics indicate that about 50 to 60% of what the teams are doing once we've done the rollout is the signposting. Now, signposting, there's 2 elements to that. There's the first element of, very basic signposting. So that's for services to know what, services are available in their area. So, for example, if there's any handy person schemes that the people can have access to, whether that's paid or unpaid, whether they can self-refer or whether they need a professional to refer. And there's potentially work that localities can do to to enable self-referrals to these services or to develop these kind of services in their areas. And then there's the second element to signposting that can involve quite a lot of difficult conversations. So, for example, how we relate with health. Our health colleagues, I already mentioned, when we consider which service is best placed to meet this person's needs. So certainly in Surrey, in some of the areas, what we've discovered is that, all hoist provision was, adult social care had to do all hoist provision. So, for example, then our UCR colleagues, they would go out and assess a person, identify that a hoist is needed, then refer to adult social care for that hoist provision. And then adult social care would go out, assess that person who already has been assessed to need a hoist, but because we then have to do our own assessment, we go and we do the same assessment twice, whereas instead we could have potentially gone and assessed somebody else. And instead of actually between health and social care, assessing two people, we only achieve 50% of our potential because we keep assessing the same people. And then what happens, this person, what we could have gone out to assess, then their needs escalate and they end up on health's caseload, and then or going into hospital, having to be discharged with a package of care. So not only it's costing us, the whole service as a whole, money and resources, it's then, we're having to pay for a package of care that potentially we didn't need to pay. We're having to pay for the OT assessments that we potentially didn't need to pay for the same person twice. So it's just causing unnecessary strain on the service when we keep duplicating the work. So very much one of the goals of the 5 steps is also to reduce duplication. So that is very, very briefly in terms of signposting. Step 2 is, of course, ordering equipment from duty, so remotely. There's a lot of again, people find this difficult because there's a lot of skill involved in having, to order equipment remotely. As occupational therapists, even as you walk up to somebody's doorway, you're scanning the environment. You're seeing what the access is like, are there any rails? Are there any steps? And then when you meet the person, you kind of connect their functional ability with what you've already seen. So what we're asking, OTs to do now is to actually, you need to be able to see by hearing. So you need to be able to, what you usually would have seen when you do that home visit, you now need to be able to put into a question, and how to do that. And you need to be aware of what it is that you're actually taking in when you're doing visits. So what we're asking teams is before you go out on a home visit, to actually think about, okay, what are the questions I'm going to ask when I go out? And then when I'm at the person's house, I've already, I do my assessment. And then when I get back to the office, to then look at actually what did I assess? And so that is one way of identifying the blind spots, so that next time when I have that telephone conversation, oh, I forgot, this is a question that I can then ask, but it's a question that I wouldn't have necessarily asked unless I've identified it through reflection. So it's really becoming aware of, the questions to ask, and really doing that activity analysis, but, remotely. And then, of course, the other thing that we also find is, when we're at somebody's home, we are risk assessing, but there's a lot of content, or there's a lot of assessing that goes on internally, inside our heads. Whereas if we do, because obviously, you might be sitting there and you're thinking, well, isn't this, how safe is this approach? But actually, because you're communicating the risks more clearly to families, you're educating families. They're the people that are there every single day. You're going in and out, you do your assessment, you do your intervention, and then you're out of there. And you communicate, obviously, the risks to the person. But when you're doing a remote assessment, because you're aware so much more of the risks, you're communicating more of those risks to the people, risks that you might not have if you'd done the home visit, it would have stayed inside. But now you're communicating that, and which means that you're empowering the carer or the person, to manage their risks or those around them that is involved with their care on a daily basis, which means, it fits in again with prevention, because when you communicate risks, people are aware of it. Whereas if you don't communicate it, they're obviously not aware of it. So it is definitely empowering the people that we serve much more, and their caregivers, to be able to assess and to manage the risks. So then the other thing in terms of ordering equipment from duty, so step two, is the consideration whether we're going to review that piece of equipment once we've ordered it. So again, it's we will ask all the questions, implement seeing by hearing, order the equipment then, once we are satisfied that we can do so, and then we will consider, are we going to review this piece of equipment? A lot of teams, they will say, well, yes, just in case. Well, just in case is not clinical reasoning. Just in case either it, demonstrates a lack of confidence, or it demonstrates a lack of information. So, again, you need to, when we ask teams to implement the 5 steps, is providing clinical reasoning for everything that they do. Again, what they're doing, why they're doing it, and what they're not doing and why they're not doing it. And there's reasons for me continuing to repeat that sentence, but that, I don't think we'll have time to explore that further today. But yeah, so just in case is not a clinical reasoning. So the example I like to use here is, for example, if you have a 90-year-old lady and you're having the conversation with her, and the other thing that we do with strengths-based conversations is a term that we use, is finding the treasure. Okay, so it's active listening, getting a little bit of a picture about this person and their life. So, for example, Doris, this 90-year-old lady, she's able to, still manage the stairs. She gets a little bit breathless, but she wants to continue to do the stairs because she wants, she knows that if you don't use it, you lose it. So Doris likes to go up the stairs. So she can still do that. She still goes out, a few times a week. So she's pretty active. She's got a daughter, maybe living in South Africa, and she's in touch with that daughter via WhatsApp, so we know she can manage the internet. And then we start talking about the reason for the referral, which is she struggles with bathing. Immediately you can hear the tone of her in her voice drops, because Doris, she can't access the bath, something that she's obviously done her whole life. And she says to you, I've been through the war and now I can't even access my own bath. What has my life come to? You can then, because you found the treasure, you can then say, Doris, like, I speak to a lot of people and you are 90, and my word, you still do the stairs, you're savvy on the internet, you keep in touch with your daughter, because you've actively listened and you remembered. You can now feed back to Doris and you can say that to her, which makes her realize, oh, actually, you know what, I'm still doing really well. So you're immediately empowering her, making her see all the positives in her life and that she can still do this. And then you can say, so do you know what, yeah, so this is what it comes to. You might not be able to get in and out of the bath, but we can help you with this. So we can give you this piece of equipment, and then you can explain the risks to Doris. You can send a letter to her with all the contraindications. You can send her links, on YouTube or whatever, and then you have the decision to make. Am I going to review this or not? Now, if you say to Doris, do you know what, Doris, I'm going to order this equipment and I'm going to give you a call in a week's time, just in case. What have you just done? You've just introduced doubt. And you've undone basically all that you've just done to empower her, because now she's thinking, well, you must be worried about something, because why is she wanting to call me just in case? So that's the one narrative of that conversation. The second pathway is where I say to Doris, as an OT, as a professional that she respects, hopefully, I can say to her, Doris, you know what? You're doing so well. There's no reason for me to think that I need to give you a call back because of this piece of equipment. If you're a little bit nervous, maybe, make sure there's somebody there when you use the bath lift the first time. If you have a pendant alarm, make sure that's handy, or you have your mobile phone close by or something. But there's no reason for me to call you back. I'm going to send you our contact details, and you can contact us afterwards. You have the two options. The one option will make Doris think about, is there something this professional is worried about? Or the other option, actually, this professional has confidence in my abilities. Now, there's a lot of other factors to consider, of course, but this is one example. So, obviously, you're going to consider mental capacity, you're going to consider the person's history, but it's just not to have that default thinking that because I provided a bath lift, I have to follow up because that's what we've always done and just in case. So it's about clinical reasoning. I can soundly state why I'm not, going to call Doris back to do this assessment. I can provide my clinical reasoning for that, and there's no, and that should be enough. But I am making sure that I cover all the concerns. So if there's a concern that I'm not comfortable with, then obviously I will follow up. So step 3 is something we use called the equip notebook. So if we can't order the equipment straight away and there's an environmental factor or we just can't make sense of what this person is saying, then we might want to gather more information about the environment, more measurements, etc. In which case we could send out the equip notebook. It's a notebook that we've developed in our team, and it asks for measurements, etc. Or simply we can ask for photos. But again, there's a reason why this is step 3. If you can gather the information by just having a conversation, why make the person wait? Why give them another task to do to send you a photo if that's not needed? We all know that in today's day and age, we don't have time. And also, so not only are we're creating a delay in the care provision, which then means a risk that continues. It's asking the person to do something extra that they might not want to do, or their family to do something that they might not have time to do. And it's well, we as a service then needs to wait as well until we get that information. So if we can provide that need without getting that photo, then that's the best option. Also, there's no reason why when you're on the phone, you can't just say to this person, hey, do you have a measuring tape to hand? Can you just go and measure? Or is there somebody else with you that could maybe just quickly take a measurement? I'll just hold the line. um, you know, I was talking to one of the teams and they were saying to me, oh, we can't ask somebody to use, they're 80. And so when I said this to my mom, who is 80, she was like, oh my goodness, I grew up with a measuring tape. Of course I can use a measuring tape. So we really need to just, I suppose, be conscious that not to make assumptions. Just ask the question, can you do this? And if they can't, fine, let's use another avenue to to get the information that we need. So just step 3 is then, if you can't order that equipment straight from duty, it's and other tools to use to actually get the information you need to be able to order the equipment from duty. So from step 3, the goal is to go back to step 2, really. Step 4 is what we call our smart working OT service. Time, Paul, right?
Yeah, get in there. Yes, if you can whiz through steps 4 and 5, that'd be fantastic.
Step 4 is SWAT, Smart Working OT. The idea is the OT with the van. So it's, if there's any other factors to consider, for example, hoarding, or, if the person doesn't engage, we might want to send somebody out really quickly to do a face-to-face assessment, and they can then take that equipment out, trial and assess the equipment, and also obviously do the review at the same time, come back to the office and order the equipment. Step 5 is the traditional allocation. Now, there's a lot of stuff underpinning these 5 steps, how you, like I said, how you approach the conversations, etc. So if anybody is interested in having further conversations, please get in touch with myself, and we're always happy to arrange conversations, just to explain it in a little bit more detail. But there is a lot underpinning this in terms of strength-based conversations, etc. Was that okay,
Yeah,
Paul?
that's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I think the kind of proof of the pudding is in the length of the waiting list, isn't it? I think at a time when waiting lists are going up in pretty much every other local authority across England, not to have one is definitely a kind of fantastic result from the work you've done.
Thank you. And also, it's an approach that went through COVID. Through the pressures of COVID, and we all have people potentially going on maternity leave, sickness, those kind of things. We've always been able to manage the demand on our service. And actually, as we're doing the rollout, the change in the workforce has been incredible. Just their level of confidence and their well-being. So, in terms of recruitment, staff retention, the impact has been really, very, very positive.
Yes, yeah.
So thank you.
There's kind of one question from Walter there in terms of kind of leaning towards OTs at the front door as first contact for adult social care. Is that kind of part of the approach?
So the model that we have alongside the 5 steps is what we call duty power hour. So it's not just putting OT at the front. Actually, from our perspective, the workforce has to be fluid. So at the front door and, doing the long-term work, because the long-term work informs your reasoning at the front door. So we don't have the model where everything is triaged by OT first and then moving on. How we've created the structure that we have is that we have more people on duty, but only for 2 hours in the day. So that creates optimal performance because, if anybody's done, well, I'm sure most people do duty all day long. By the afternoon, you can't even think straight anymore. So your productivity really reduces. So what we're doing is we're putting more staff on the front door, but for much shorter periods of time. So you achieve much more in a shorter period of time while duty is covered. So you're staying on top of the work coming in the front door, and you can do more at the front door. So we're now chasing people rather than people chasing us because they're not waiting for our assessment. We're waiting for them to provide
Yeah.
us with the information that is needed. So I hope I understood that question
Yeah, I
correctly.
think so. So thank you for that. I'm sure it's something we'll be revisiting, and it'd be great to kind of get you back at on a future Foundations Live when we can kind of perhaps have a deeper dive into some of the aspects of the service and perhaps think through the kind of the whole kind of assessment process and kind of the different pathways that people go through. I think that'd be really useful, and certainly lots of encouraging comments in the chat as well. So lots of people interested in that. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. And if there's any more questions, I'll come back to you in a few minutes. But for now, thank you very much for joining us, Jone.